All right. Well, let's. We probably know everybody, but just for the recording and sake of posterity, let's do just a quick round of introductions. I'll just start from my left of my screen and go around. So, Jen Ewan.
Hey everyone, I think the only person I don't know is you, Claire. But yeah, I own my own law firm with another woman, Erica Peterman, here in town called Sova, and often work with Jen and Morgan and Paul on different matters and have known them for years. So that's me.
And Claire, you're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Claire, and I am the Venture Coaching Program Manager at the Launchpad.
Awesome.
Jen Stevens, you're next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Stevens, and I run the Missoula Small Business Development Center, helping businesses with, a lot with financial stuff for COVID right now, but, business startup scaling, financing questions.
And Morgan.
Hi, I focus on women's entrepreneurship at UN, so pleased to be here, Carl.
Yeah, great to have you. And I'm Carl Unterschutz, stepping in. Jen and I are co-hosting this together, stepping in for Paul. I am the Outreach and Engagement Manager for AMRI, which stands for Accelerate Montana's Rural Innovation Initiative, essentially doing business startup and launchpad activities in rural Montana.
That's awesome.
So, yeah, it's good fun. And so thanks, Jen, for coming on today and being willing to sort of tackle some of these questions. Again, this is really focused on trying to get some questions answered for people that may not always have access to attorneys or so forth, or even some of these questions are coming out of the uncertainty and the newness of the environment now, and a lot of legal ones, of course, as you may know. So I really appreciate you jumping in and being willing to try this out. So let's give it a shot. I think, Jen and Claire, if you don't mind, let's start with the questions you're posting, Claire, that are coming off the questionnaire we sent out. So the first one here is, who has authority in Montana to define a healthy emergency? Or sorry, a health emergency.
That'd be awesome if there was a health emergency happening right now.
Everybody get outside.
I can try to tackle that. So I think from the top down, it can start federally, right, with a national emergency if that were to be declared. So the president could actually declare a national emergency that everyone, wear masks, for example, or have to abide by, or mandate that federal government employers or buildings, have to do XYZ in this health crisis. Then kind of going down the line, it's up to the states. The governors obviously have a lot of leeway there in determining what health decisions are made for the citizens of Montana. But then a lot of times what the governors do is punt to each county, because each county is so unique, depending on population size and active COVID cases and things like that. So it ends up largely falling on the county health departments to determine the health guidelines surrounding any health crisis.
And maybe just a quick follow-up on that. We've seen a bit of that, of course, in the counties here in Missoula last Thursday, passing a mask requirement. But then the governor did yesterday. So statewide. So that kind of answers the question.
Right. And I think he's still, if counties wanted to go even further, because right now, the governor's order is, any county that has 4 or more active cases, I believe, has to have wear masks in private or inside of buildings. But I think counties can still mandate, just like Missoula is, even further.
Right. Okay. So the second question here is, what is the HIPAA protection state regarding not disclosing your health data, and how would that relate to mask mandates?
My understanding is that HIPAA still is in play, but that employers, so it kind of HIPAA related, HIPAA is still in play. Like people are responsible for protecting health care private information, from access. However, I know we've seen employers normally, like, you wouldn't be able to take temperatures or ask about illness or, kind of dive into a person's health history. I think with COVID, private employers at least, are given a lot more leeway in terms of ensuring that the employee is, so they can ask a lot more questions and they can ask for proof of the medical condition, things like that.
So that's for their employees. How about for for customers coming in. I just had this conversation with somebody yesterday. Customer comes in and says, hey, I have a health condition. Can they or can they not request or require documentation of that condition so they don't have to wear a mask?
You know, I don't know the official answer to that. My guess would be that it's just a customer and not an employee. They probably can't request documentation of that, but they can refuse, you know, service. And, you know, if they're not wearing a mask and they're exhibiting symptoms, I think they can refuse service. But in terms of asking for verification, I think that my lawyer brain is telling me that that wouldn't fly. Probably.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I haven't seen anything official on that yet.
So if you and you do a lot of stuff in your work, there's the attorney in you, of course, the lawyer brain, and then there's the other consulting piece that you and Erica do. If you were to put that hat on for a second, how might you chat with people about it? I mean, I think, and Jen, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the county's requirement is you have to provide, if somebody has some sort of requirement that does not allow them to wear a mask, you have to then provide, you can't refuse them service, but you have to provide some kind of accommodation, which could be just providing that accommodation or providing service outside, curbside pickup, delivery, something else.
Appointment, by appointment only, things like that. Yes. Sorry, I thought you were asking if they literally walk into your store, they're exhibiting symptoms. Like, can you ask for proof right then and there? That's what you were talking about. No. Okay. No, exactly. So I think trying to make accommodations, but if you're making accommodations and that person's insisting on it, yes, I think you can ask for proof.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other follow-ups there? Jen, Barb, and Claire, any thoughts?
I was wondering, like, where would a business owner go to read up on that? Would they go to the county health department? Would they go to the governor's directives? Is it buried somewhere else in the MCA?
Unfortunately, they're going to have to go to the governor's directives and to the county health department. The county health department would be the first place I would go. But then, just like anything else, if the governor has additional issues in there, that still covers Missoula. So if you're, you know, a Missoula person, you'd want to read both.
Great.
This, so question number 3, interesting one. I'm not sure how it applies, but let's throw it out there. A recall of public officials. What are the qualifications to recall a mayor, council member, city attorney, or governor?
That I do not know off the top of my head. I'd have to look at that. I'm guessing it would be a petition or vote of city council, or, you know, I am not sure. I don't want to talk out of my ass on that one.
Yeah. So here's another one. This is kind of, I think, to some of the ones that Jen, you run into. So this is good. Are event contracts enforceable? And there's some follow-ups in here if that's not enough.
Yeah, that's not enough. So I think that, and we just actually had a client that called us. So they're a wedding venue, and it was the mother of the bride, of course. And she called our client and said, you know, we are still set to go for September. And our client said, well, yes, as long as it's 50 people or under and you're abiding by the social distancing rules and blah, blah, blah. And the woman said, well, no, we are having about 250 people coming from all over, like Montana and all over the country. And our client said, well, I literally cannot do that based on the governor's order. And then she resides in Lewis and Clark County, and Lewis and Clark County will provide variances. So one wedding recently was approved for 70 people, but they had to have tables 6 feet apart, and there was no dancing, and no one, you know, they had to be 6 feet apart going through the buffet line, things like that. But there was no way Lewis and Clark was going to approve give a variance for 250 guests. And so when she told the mother of the bride this, she was furious. And we worked out a deal in terms of breaching the contract, because there is a question in here I saw earlier for acts of God. And so what we've been adding to the language of contracts is essentially like adding to the force majeure clause, which usually has acts of God, hurricanes, bankruptcies, things like that are out of the person's control. We add pandemics or epidemics, so to that list. But acts of God, I think, would encompass that as well. If not everyone believes in God, so that's a little tricky, you know, in terms of in lumping it in there. So I think it would just fall under natural disasters as well. I mean, I just think it's kind of a no-brainer that would fall under the force majeure generally category. But in this case, they settled on, because it wasn't official, she didn't officially cancel the contract and she had put some deposit down. The contract language basically stated that our client was able to keep her entire deposit if she wanted to, but she chose to give about $1,000 back to the client, and they agreed to non-disparagement and things like that. But I mean, yes, absolutely, that contract can be breached when there's a government mandate that only 50 people or less can attend any public gathering. So,
Okay.
Gathering.
I know some clients that I've worked with, they hold like customer deposits in escrow or something like that, and kind of distribute it as the project is completed. I'm thinking of like technology development projects here, but would it be more prudent in this time period to hold any deposits in escrow like that until you see what happens with the event?
That's what most vendors are doing. This woman just wouldn't move the date and didn't want to limit the number of people to 50. She refused to. Most of the other contracts that she had were either postponing and just they were holding the deposit in there and getting a different date, or changing the dynamics of the actual event itself. So to comply.
There's a follow-up question here that maybe you can say more to it. You were speaking to some additional language, but is there any more additional language should be a business take into their contracts to protect a business from revenue loss, employees' health, that sort of thing? I mean, now, so are you writing a contract today, what more language should you be putting in there? Did you say as much as you think is necessary?
I mean, what's really hard about this is it really is, it's out of everyone's control. So in terms of revenue loss, it's really up to the parties in terms of how, they can agree to continue, especially. So what we've been doing too is adding language. Let's say if the force majeure event lasts more than 90 days, correct? The contract can be canceled without any penalties to either party. It's so specific to each party's interests. So it's hard for me to give like a overall answer, but I would say that, a lot of new businesses starting up too. I have one that we're representing that's starting up, and they are hiring a consultant out of California, and the consultant wanted a 5-year contract, and there was no, sort of epidemic or pandemic language in there. So we added that, and also added that 90-day, like if that doesn't happen in 90 days, then because there was a $30,000 cancellation fee if she canceled the contract with this consultant. And so we wanted to make sure that in case of a pandemic, then she's able to cancel without paying the cancellation penalty fee. Sure. So again, it's just up to each party. They've got to negotiate like around this.
So if we flip that around and say, let's say you're working under a contract that was written 6 months ago or 9 months ago prior to COVID and so forth, and now you're in a situation where you're finding that the client is asking you to do something that isn't meeting your health comfortable level, like it's not outside the government regulations, but you're not comfortable doing it. What are you finding generally? Have you found anything like that or addressed any of those where you're trying to sort of negotiate?
More in the employer-employee situation where there's an employee that isn't sick with COVID, is not taking care of anyone with COVID, doesn't have a child out of school because of COVID, but they just don't feel comfortable coming in. What is the employer bound by? Are they bound to, paid sick leave and FMLA leave? And they're not, as long as those things don't occur. But in terms of a client, I think, again, so if they're not reasonable, and I think most people are reasonable on these. So let's say the contract was written 6 months ago and there was no sort of helpful language in there. I think both parties would call each other and say, hey, can we adjust this? If they're not willing, and let's say it went to the whole lawsuit stage, a court's not going to uphold the contract because they're not going to force a company to operate or to continue doing something during COVID that no other business would, so I wouldn't be too concerned if I had, didn't have protective language as of 6 months prior, but I always tell clients, call each other, talk first. I mean, you can contract around anything.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Let's see. I think we're on to number 7. Can I decline a contract for an event where people aren't? Yeah.
100%.
Number 8, what do I do if I get to an event that is supposed to be socially distanced and I have a mask, but that is not happening when I arrive?
So In order to protect your business license, I think, if there's concern for the county health department showing up as someone, if anybody sees it and reports it, right, the county health department's going to come and shut it down immediately, and you're going to get some fines likely. So I would say talk to the event person, ask them to immediately remedy it. Doesn't work, then just to be on the safe side of the county, call the county and just state what's happening, and have them be the bad police coming and shutting things down, just because you don't want to put your license or your business license at risk.
Sure. So if somebody were in that situation and they were to do, let's say it's a caterer, just for example, and they were to do everything to follow the guidelines themselves, but the rest of the event is not, would that protect them under legal liability?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the contract should state, in the event that that this is fine to no fault of the person who's done everything right, and the client, let's say the client is at fault, then the client is on the hook for those fees in that, that situation. And so they're indemnifying essentially the vendor.
Okay. Any follow-ups on that? You can see that'd be kind of complicated.
I'm just imagining that situation where I hear Jen saying that the business would have like every right to not honor a contract at an event where the event organizers are not complying with the current regulations. And also I just imagine like how uncomfortable that would be for a business.
It'd be awful. Yeah.
Right. You have to protect your employees, and, I guess it comes down to, businesses have to operate under whatever the current regulatory environment is and comply. So I like what you said about contacting the health department so that they've got their bases covered as far as creating a sort of documentation trail of what occurred on that date.
This is a bit of a similar question. Is there any special language to include in contracts if I or my employees have health needs to take into consideration? Presumably that's if they're going to do an event and they have special health considerations. Do you have any ideas on language to include there?
I mean, other than ensuring that they're complying with the government. So if there are, letting the client know or letting the person know they're contracting with about those special needs, making sure that they can accommodate that, or not having the employee with the special needs be at the event. I guess you would try to accommodate and fill it in with someone else that could actually do the event. I mean, that one is just try to accommodate on both sides of that one.
Yeah.
All of these are going to be like that. I mean, really, you're going to do a lot of communicating with the people you're working with and trying to solve those issues. But if someone has like pre-existing conditions that make them particularly vulnerable, I think that if you're an employer, you cannot force them to participate in something that's riskier. Yeah,
I think that speaks to the next question then. What kind of liability does a business have if that is the case?
If an employee, so if you're doing everything right and an employee contracts COVID at work, I don't think that there's no strict liability there. But if there's negligence or you're failing to follow state or local guidelines, I think that a business would be liable. In terms of how much, I don't know. That's a damages question that's always unique to in terms of lost wages and, healthcare costs and all those things that get kind of added up. But I think if you're doing everything right and the person contracts it, you'd have to prove that they weren't doing everything right too. So liability that's a very gray area to talk about, or it's too broad to talk about.
And presumably it's the same answer for the next question, which is if you transmit it from employee to client or something like that, as long as you're following the rules, the health rules, you're okay.
Yep.
Do you know this? I know you're not insurance expert, but have you heard from clients at all if business liability insurance policies are making adjustments in their language for these kinds of things?
We haven't. That's not something, and it's probably a good phone call that I should make with a few of the commercial insurance agents that I refer to sometimes. But everybody's playing catch up,
right?
So I don't know.
Here's maybe an interesting one, kind of put on your creative hats as well here, legal one. So what contract actions can I help to protect my business and provide great customer service? Maybe this goes to your communication piece, but so if you're really working with customers or working with your clients to help them put together some communication and clear direction or manage expectations.
I mean, I think you can start, and I'll let everybody else weigh in too, is again, having a staff meeting for your employees and going over the guidelines and ensuring having everyone sign something. You're aware that we have to do X, Y, Z, people can't come in without masks and, you know, all of that stuff, but then including it in your employee handbook, you know, that not necessarily the step-by-step guidelines because it's going to change all the time, but putting something in your handbook that basically states every employee here will comply with federal, state, and local government healthcare guidelines, you know. So things like that can be really, so an employee can't say, you know, and then have the employee sign that they read through that or have them sign a special document, but they can't say that they didn't see anything or didn't, you know about it later. And then in terms of clients, just have really good signage, you know, make sure it's visible, and that when customers are walking through the door, clients are coming in, that staff is communicating. That's the first thing out of their mouth is kind of what the expectations are with the interactions at the business.
Right. So we, early on, this is maybe a couple of months ago, a conversation around this liability question. Does that feel like over time, in the last few months, that because county health departments have been acting and there's clear guidance now, or there is guidance whether clear or not, are you feeling from your position that this is getting into the realm again of being pretty straight, not super straightforward, but at least you can follow some direction?
Yeah, I think it really is helpful when the government sort of mandates what people are supposed to do, because if they don't, you know, one coffee shop might have masks when there's no mask mandate and one might not. And then they're having to deal with angry people and, like, you know, and regardless, they're dealing with angry people. But I think when you can blame it again on a government action, I think it's a little easier to have some consistency there.
I was wondering, can a business like efficiently write up those kinds of policies themselves, or are there certain professionals they should engage to get that new policy documentation right? Do they need an attorney, an HR person, a template online?
The HR person usually spearheads that if they have that tool, but then always have an attorney look it over, because Montana, every law related to like employment law or your handbook or whatever is unique to each state. So when I do them for different states, I never use a cookie cutter employee handbook, just because there's different laws for leave policies and, you know, and things like that. So you want to make sure that you have an employer or a lawyer looking at the final version of that, at least, to make sure it's good to go. You're not violating any sort of laws that are out there on the federal and state level.
So I think the next couple of ones we've touched on already. Last one, what does a business need to do if an employee tests positive for COVID? Are there cleaning and closing guidelines? You know,
I mean, I think it's, yes, they should call the county health department right away, let them know that that's happened. Then the county starts the tracing, you know, who's this person been in contact with. And it is recommended that they shut the business down for at least enough time that they can thoroughly clean it according to the, you know, the healthcare guidelines. Every surface, things like Paradise Falls was a good example. When someone, you know, tested there, they shut it down for a few days and cleaned every inch of it. And then in terms of what you have to do, you have to offer paid sick leave for that person. And depending on whether they're full-time or part-time status, depending on how much they get a percentage of their normal wage for up to 80 hours, I believe, and it hasn't changed. And then same with part-time, it's just based on their hours. And then if they're caring for someone who's sick, it's a reduced kind of rate there. So and then there's leave. So if someone tests positive for COVID and they've exhausted all their sick leave, they can take FMLA leave if they haven't used any in the prior year. So there's pretty clear guidelines on what employers need to do if they have employees that are sick or taking care of someone who are sick.
Does that
government mandate?
When the county is actually tracing or tracking, monitoring is the term that they use, if people that have been associated or at work with somebody who's contracted COVID, are they also then prevented from working at that time? So could you lose, so if one person contracts COVID all the other employees that worked on their shift or is in contact with them would have to stay home too for.
I think temporarily, yes, until until they're tested.
Right. And we've heard a number of businesses say that that's actually one of their biggest concerns, is because all of a sudden they could shut them down for a couple of weeks. They just wouldn't be able to have anybody work, or they couldn't get employees. So.
Right.
I was wondering with that question if there was like a standard amount of time that a business had to stop operations, or certain kinds of businesses that have to, because we've seen some examples, like you mentioned, in the community, some different businesses that have gone through that, and it wasn't clear to me like what was required and what were they doing sort of because they thought it was the best choice.
Yeah, and I don't know the answer to in terms of what is the step-by-step health, the county's health checklist in terms of here's what you must clean. I think the businesses are just taking it upon themselves to do a really deep dive, hospital level clean of their premises. I know I talked to one of our clients who she's spending like 70% more, I think she said yesterday, on cleaning supplies than she has historically, because she's cleaning so much. So
what industry is that, if you can share that?
Yeah, no, she's in the childcare.
Yeah.
Toddlers, could you imagine trying to herd that?
Being outside. Yeah. Our son just went to a little camp today outside. It's all outside, so it's the first time we've done that. Let's see.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. So I think this kind of touches on all of the questions we've had. Claire, do you see any more in there that I missed? I think we've got those. And Jen, the ones you posted were very similar. A lot of them were overlapping. So I also kind of want to sort of talk about it, the sort of generally how you're seeing this, if anything, Jen, that you want to share that might be helpful for folks, not just in a legal sense, but communication, strategy, expectations.
I mean, people are really huge adjustments. So websites who've never been set up for online orders or online purchasing or curbside pickup had to completely revamp their entire website to accommodate that, right? And that's depending on whether or not they have the cash flow to sort of ramp that up is quickly or slowly is the issue. And then a lot of people are finding that the online, I think there's going to be some real changes coming out of this where maybe people won't go back to as much of a brick and mortar store, and they're going to rely more heavily on the online. People are more comfortable there. Businesses are set up better there. So we're seeing that. We're also seeing a lot of businesses from out of state moving in. And so we had a little bit of a lull during the true stay at home order, SOVA did, but then as soon as that was lifted, we started getting contacted through word of mouth, just XYZ business, Virginia's moving here, California, and then we are seeing a lot of acquisitions. So we're in the middle of 3 right now. We did one in 2019, a really large multi-million-dollar one, and now we're seeing really much smaller, kind of regional businesses that are doing really well, that are buying up ones that aren't doing as well, and again shifting models with those. So yeah, we've got 3. We're busy, and I'm just trying to think what else. I mean, I've done a lot of employment law stuff with this, and really working with the banks and with the accountants, trying to understand the SBA program and what are the after effects of that? How much documentation do you need to have to ensure that you're complying with it so you don't have to pay back the PPP loan, or, what is just all of that stuff. We've been doing a lot with working with our employer clients.
Are there legal questions that are coming up with those programs, or is that mostly the business consulting side of things? Yeah,
more on that side, but then the employment law.
Yeah.
I mean, with the FMLA leave and the leave policy, sick leave, things like that, that really, because, one of the questions I got, which I really had to dive into, was the FMLA one. So, if you are an employer who has 50 or more employees, then you have to comply with the Federal Medical Leave Act. And a lot of companies around here choose to anyways, even if they have fewer than 50, but then you have to provide, it doesn't have to be paid leave, but leave during a birth of a child, right? And so if someone's already used all of that FMLA leave and then they get COVID, you can't stack them. So it's not like they can get additional FMLA leave in this time period. So things like that, just really nuanced questions from employers about leave.
So essentially, COVID doesn't create a new or special situation that if you already use it.
Yeah, not for FMLA, for sick, for sure. You have mandatory paid sick leave, no matter, you know, and I think with the sick leave, you only have to be employed for 30 days. Like usually for sick leave, a lot of employers have 90 days or a year even, sometimes as a probationary period. But if you've been employed for at least 30 days, you get the mandatory sick leave.
And that's COVID specific.
Yes, that's the COVID specific leave. Mm-hmm. And then they can choose to use, you can't require that your employee use like accrued sick leave for that. It's additional sick leave that the employer has to pay. That original sick leave just can still sit in that accrued pile. But then the employer gets a tax break on that forced paid sick leave, and with the FMLA too, related to COVID, their accountant will work with them on the tax side for that.
So the paid sick leave for COVID is in addition to the FMLA.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And the paid sick leave for COVID is also a reduced rate. It's not the 100% pay, correct? Do you know?
God, I'd have to look back on that. I feel like the paid leave, hold on, let me look at something really quick. I'm gonna pull it up because I had a little presentation on that. And I know it's not changed. Let's see here. Mm-hmm. I might have to get back to you guys on that. I'll send a little note on the sick leave because I do not know where I put that. Little presentation.
So other than, and maybe this is, because again, we're trying to see if we can help or support businesses that may or may not otherwise have access to attorneys and so forth, or haven't in the past. To Jen's question earlier, again, just to reiterate this, where can folks go find the information they really need for the employment part? Because it sounds like to me, and this is several we've had on this, the complexity of this is increased a lot in the last couple of months.
Yeah,
so
I mean,
can they do it without an attorney or counsel? And
oh, for sure. Yeah.
Where can you go?
Yeah, no, so I just finally found the Families First Coronavirus Response Act, and so it's the U.S. Department of Labor has a great site, and I'm going to put the site, actually, I'm going to shoot it over to you guys.
Great, stick it in the chat.
Oh, let's see here. Okay, there it is there, and it is regular rate of pay for the paid sick. For up to, 80 hours. Yeah, so it kind of walks through the sick leave. Like if you're sick, then it's full. But if someone's subject to quarantine and are taking care of them, it's at 2/3 the rate, things like that. So it does go over that. And then the SBA loans and information, people want to be checking that all the time. So for example, that SBA disaster loan was available to everyone. And then all of a sudden they narrowed it just to egg businesses for a while. I can't say it. And then they opened it back up, right? So you got to be checking that all the time to understand, okay, what am I eligible for, and things like that. So
yes, and the PPP sunsetted and then it was extended till August 8th. So
yeah. Mm-hmm.
This is a little off topic, but so the conversations earlier have been about employees collecting unemployment in the last couple of weeks or months, and then having that more. Have you run any challenges or negotiations or conversations with folks that sort of help employees come back even though they feel like they're earning more on unemployment? I know this is kind of a topic that seems to be starting to get ironed out, but just wanted to sort of hear your thoughts on that.
If an employer suspects that the person can come back and they have an available position to come back, they need to notify the unemployment office. I mean, they can't, they're obligated to do that. So that's considered fraud if you don't need it anymore, but you're still using it.
Right.
So is that fraud on behalf of the person receiving unemployment insurance, or are there also potential fraud issues for the business that doesn't report their employees?
I would imagine so. I mean, this is seriously new territory, but I would imagine that the state would frown upon an employer who allowed that.
Yeah, you can. So one of the questions we've had from small communities is who sort of employers that have said, look, I can't really do that. I don't have very many people I can hire. And if I start doing that in this community, I'm not going to have anybody, because I'll sort of, create a lot of bad blood. So it's a difficult thing to navigate, particularly in small communities, I think.
Right.
But yeah, that's why I think it keeps coming back up. Any other thoughts on that? I mean, we kind of zipped through those questions. You nailed them. So I don't know where else to go.
Thing to say. So these are a lot of these questions have been sort of reactionary to the current environment. Is there anything you would recommend businesses do, like being forward thinking or proactive for like this situation and other potential, disaster planning they should be doing?
I would just say update your documents, update your handbooks, your operating agreements, things like that. Again, let's say you have a multi-member business. So you've got an LLC, it's got 3 members, and COVID's lasted for X number of days. You could have a clause in there that basically states that's a reason we can dissolve without, so you know what I mean? Like things like just getting your documents up to speed for pandemics, and then adjusting your business models. Sitting down and really kind of thinking outside the box and like, how can we do this where we're adjusting to COVID, and a lot of people are doing that already. So just to survive.
So this might be a little nuanced, but you've said a couple different times, Jim, that, if COVID's still around or COVID's still present, how might you define that legally? So if it's still present, meaning that there's still people getting it or still under some restriction, how might you define that if you're looking at writing that into a contract?
I would define it by if there's a government mandate or if there is government action related to a pandemic, because you're always COVID's with us. It's going to be like the flu, right? We're never going to be rid of it. We might have a vaccine, but it might be just as effective as the flu. So depending on the year, somewhat effective, or lessens the severity, whatever it is, but we're living with it. So it's a matter of, I think, when there's government mandates that affect your business, that's the language that should be used.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's interesting to hear that you're getting sort of interest in acquisitions. And you don't have to share details, but I was thinking if there are businesses that are here interested in selling or looking for that, but might think this is a terrible time to do it, is it maybe a good time to look to sell?
Yeah, I think if you've got the cash to buy a business, now's a great time to do it. The one thing we're seeing, things are moving really slowly at the banks. The underwriters at the banks are really struggling with the load, and then also being much more strict. Let's say they wanted, your loan to debt ratio needs to be 80-20, right? In normal commercial transactions. Because of COVID, it's like 90-10. So you're going to have to come up with a lot more collateral than on that loan, or if you need that help from the bank. So I think that a lot more unless you're cash flush or you have a lot of collateral to put down, I don't think it's as easy to get money from the bank right now. Even though it's still happening, it tends to be with people who don't necessarily need the banks as much.
Right. So maybe that's where you're seeing the activity is cash purchases.
Yep.
Sure.
This seems to be taking a lot longer. We have one right now that they're still waiting to hear back from the bank, and they're great. They've got 3 other businesses under their wing, and everything's moved through fast. But I just think because of how careful banks are being right now, it's just taking a lot longer.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about the Montana Adaptability Grant and what you said about, changes to operating agreements and, employee policy handbooks and things like that. I wonder if people could use that for that.
Probably.
Situation. It's not specifically listed, but I'm going to check. So, because that's that's an expense that a business wouldn't not normally have.
Right.
And
Right.
it's important, like you mentioned, to get that stuff updated.
Mhm.
So, all of the contingencies are considered. So,
Well, people should do that once a year anyways with their handbooks. We've seen wrongful discharge claims and unemployment claims come through. And as long as the employer has a solid handbook, like even I always say, there's always the leave policies, that stuff's kind of standard. But what I ensure that they have, and this could relate to COVID, is the culture. Put your culture in there, what you expect of your employees on top of, just COVID or not, we expect all of our employees to wash their hands, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Just keep the culture of your company or your wishes in there. And then, so let's say the employee, they're doing their job, they're coming to work on time. However, they don't fit culture wise. They don't get along with anybody. They're not great with customers. I mean, it's not something that you could say like point by point, they're not doing their job. They're doing their job, but there's just a serious discord. The more nuanced information you have in your handbook, the state actually denied, and then I have these little 1.5 page employee counseling forms. So if the employer starts to notice like, okay, this person's not getting along with 80% of their coworkers and really struggles with authority, whatever it is, and then they have to let the employee go after that probationary period, which in Montana is only 6 months unless you contract otherwise. And really, even if you contract otherwise, you can only contract for up to 12 months for that at-will employment. But let's say they're past that, so you can only let them go for good cause. Then that employee in this example could go to the state and say, well, they fired me and I did my job. Like, it's wrongful termination. I want unemployment too. But in this scenario, the employer submitted their handbook and said, look, this is really important to us here and how we all get along and all this stuff. They signed the handbook, the acknowledgement page. We have an employee contract, and we started, documenting these issues, and we sat down with the employee and went over these issues, and they denied both the wrongful discharge and they denied the unemployment claim based on that. But had they not had any of that, it's just one word against the other. It's just like, well, that person's going to say, I did my job, and then you're having a full-blown investigation where you have to bring
So
all
if you're
those
updating, if handbooks are being updated currently. Oh,
Yeah.
yeah, I think that point that you made about having an acknowledgement sheet for changes in policy due to COVID, or just generally about the employee handbook, is important. I mean, I've had other jobs where I haven't necessarily read the material, but then signed off. But this is an important addition that, you might also have a staff meeting, like you mentioned, to go over the material, and then also have documentation to sign off on the acknowledgement. That's something I hadn't thought of. So I really like that point.
Yeah, it seems like a big pain in the butt for employers, but at the same time, like when we make changes, I say just blame it on your attorney. Have it just say, okay, we're making changes to the handbook, all staff meeting, I'm buying lunch, let's go through it. Everybody signed today. It's just so much easier. I had one where they had updated their handbook, and when I got the call about the employee issues, I was like, for the love of God, please tell me that she saw the updated handbook and signed off, and she had not. Literally almost every other employee had, except for the one that was an issue. And that was an issue. Like the part that she didn't sign off on was the issue, right? So, and she probably knew that, and that's why she refused to sign it. So, but still, I mean, it's just, yeah.
So write in those specific things that you want to see now and update those employee handbooks, or write them if people don't have them, and have your employees sign them. That's a big
And then if you
takeaway.
have a good core one, that should only take a day at max. It should be so easy just to be updating it, and you'd update it with the month and year, and just that's how it's the updated one, or the latest, I guess.
Well, last few minutes, are there any other thoughts as you're working with clients out there, sort of things you're seeing now that you haven't seen historically?
No, not any more than what I've already said, just the adjustments. And we did have one client who had a mass layoff, over 30 people, and so we were dealing with that, and the severance letters, and then also sort of that guarantee of reemployment if their numbers got back to X, things like that. So just a lot of it feels like deep changes, not temporary, but really, really systematic changes in how companies, I think, are going to operate.
Any exciting changes? Like you mentioned that some of the online services and expanded market stuff might continue into the future. Any changes you're seeing that are kind of like on the upside?
Healthcare. I mean, the telehealth is just blowing up right now. And then whether it's physical therapy or pharmaceutical or whatever it is, you know, not necessarily dispensing medicine, but having pharmaceutical, like, you know, virtual advice, you know, for caregivers and patients and things like that. But just telehealth, I think that's going to be a game changer, because it's so risky, you know, anyone who is already sick or, you know, suffering from anything to go in. And I think companies who have already developed that technology, we have one in the PT space that's their interested investors just shot through the roof once this started happening. So.
Yeah, I mean, and Montana can be a great place to potentially test that, right? So.
Yeah, and then University of Montana was already had a huge telehealth project underway for rural Montana. That I know they presented in California on it. Erica and I went over on their Silva partner side and helped the team at the pharmacy school kind of pitch. You know, they were down to like 5 finalists, and one of them was here at and I don't know how that went, actually. I need to follow up with them. So yeah, I think it's a good time to really push legislators and policymakers to. And that's the other thing. Policymakers are starting to allow businesses to bill for. So part of the problem with telehealth in the past is they haven't had codes to use, right, to bill. And so that time wasn't billable, which you can't survive on that. So the policymakers are changing that aspect of it too.
Great.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear that the momentum kind of spurred by dealing with the pandemic will help get services to rural places, like many places in Montana, because everybody needs that service now. So great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jen. And thank you, Claire. And thank you, Jen, for being on this as well. So it's going to be recorded, and we'll put it up on our normal spot at the Bear website so people can look at it for reference. And appreciate you being on.
Yeah.
Stay safe.
Thanks. Yeah, you too.
Take care.
Okay, bye.
Bye.